Welcome to the Online Business Launchpad podcast. I'm your host, Trudy Rankin, and I really want to thank you for listening in today. If you are a longtime listener to this podcast, you'll know that just prior to and during COVID, we worked with over 100 people to help them start their own online business. And thanks to Australian federal government funding during that time, our Online Business Liftoff program was free for carers and people aged 50 plus who were unemployed or at risk of long-term unemployment. And I personally learned a ton during that time, particularly about what it's like to be a carer and how it impacts your ability to get a job, any kind of job, let alone one that's meaningful to you and fits into the many demands on your time because of your caring duties. And what really surprised me was how many carers actually have disabilities themselves or medical conditions that they're fighting, which makes it even harder to find meaningful employment. So for anyone in that position, it can make a lot of sense to start and grow your own business. Now, today's guest can shed a lot of light on how to do that successfully. We've got Tanya Alvarez with us, and starting out at age 25, Tanya self-funded her first New York ad agency, and she used credit cards, and I'm just going, oh, wow. And she went from 0 to 1 million in revenue in the first year, and that's pretty impressive. And what I found really surprising, it comes back and links back to what I was saying before. Along the way, she did a ton of traveling, ended up in 42 countries. She ended up doing a couple of marathons, which is something I've never done. I probably will never do. But she also did a half marathon, a half Ironman. But she did all of those things while she was battling a really rare brittle bone condition. And what I find even more impressive is since that time, she's founded, bootstrapped, sold, and invested in 5 companies. And her story is a classic underdog story, and she's really on a mission to help people own their own lives and not just their business. And so I wanted to say, Tanya, thanks for being on the podcast and welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I'm really excited to talk to you as well. I was just doing the research and looking at all the things you've done, and I'm just thinking, oh my goodness, there's quite a story here, and I'd love to unpack some of that story for our listeners. Can you just tell us a little bit more about you and some of that background about how you got into business and what it was like at that time?
When I graduated college, it was 2000, and in the US, the bubble burst in the sense of the startup world. And I really wanted to go in the startup world. So I still like that typical, I went to Wellesley College, an all-female college. Hillary Clinton, Madeleine Albright all went there. And the typical path is you either go like lawyer, doctor, management consultant, and everything. But I was still like, I want to go do a startup. So I ended up still doing a bunch of startups, and I didn't care what it was. I got offers at American Express and all these other companies, but I still wanted to take the risk to do it. So I would want to learn anything I can. And it was a small team. I was super excited to just be like, do you want me to do this? Marketers, this, I'm all in. And after 3 or 4 companies, here I was in the performance-based marketing space. It was the Wild West at that time. And it was like CPMs, $100 CPMs, $1,000 CPMs. There was like no opt-outs yet, no canned spam, you can imagine. And then I was like, oh, I like this. Maybe I should do my own thing. And I remember being, of course, scared. But I remember consulting my mother, and my mother was like, why don't you just do it? And I was like, what happens if I fail? And she goes, okay, you'll be exactly where you are now. And I was like, good point. And then I said, what happens if no one hires me? And she said, you wouldn't want to work for a company like that. And I was like, all right. And she was so true. And I tell anybody, literally, if you're at a job, just go for it sometimes. I know it just depends what you have later on. Right now, I have 2 kids, it's a little different. But I think you can still take that courage, jump and make the time. And then I think most people get paralyzed. What is the next step? Or what happens if I fail? But if you reframe that to learning, and I know it feels so common sense, but when you're doing it, it's just you're in perfectionist mode, overwhelmed mode. And then finally you just do it. And every step you'll learn faster.
It is so true. You've got to take that first step and get started. And I love the fact that your mother is there encouraging you, basically telling you, just have a crack, because not everybody who starts their own business has the understanding or that kind of understanding and support from the people around you. A lot of times people are just going, why don't you just go and get a job? I'm really curious in terms of the business that you started, which you said you funded with credit cards. Tell us
Yeah.
just a little bit more about what that startup journey was like during that first year.
So I did not come from a well-off family. My mom was a single mom raising 4 kids. I found out later on that I have osteogenesis imperfecta, which is brittle bones. My sister has always been in a wheelchair, and she's broken over like 200 bones, bones over time. I'm still running and doing everything, but my bones, I've only broken them twice, but they're in the level of, I don't know, maybe somebody very old, right? But it's just kind of increasing. And so from there, I was just like, I gotta fund this and I gotta take a chance on myself. And if I go work for another company, by the way, I'm in my 20s, right? Now that I've done a couple of companies, I realize that one thing I want to always remain curious. Sometimes we learn and then there's like this level of expectations, or we kind of put this I already know kind of scenario. And that's a thing that kind of gets stagnant. So I'm always like, oh, let me get curious. Let me be playful. Let me be a scientist. And I always remember in my 20s, that's how I was. And one of the most important things I learned in all my companies and me defying the odds, because like less than 4% of women actually break the 1 million in the US. 4%. And then if you even say from Colombian heritage, that's even smaller percentage. And then coming from a single household, it's less and less. And I realized, what was that thing that helped me defy the odds? And it wasn't big communities. It is a small group of people, 3 to 5 people that I can be vulnerable with and share like really deep things like the fear or something I'm going through, and still encouraging me to move forward. And I think that's what happened with my mother. My mother didn't scare me. My sister didn't. Like, I had a whole support and friends that were just like, hey, yeah, encouraging me. And they're like, if you fail, you fail. Where you are right. A lot of people don't have that support, or they have to almost pretend, because everyone's, oh, wow, you started your own business, and they have to kind of pretend they have everything together. So they don't have a place to have that conversation.
That's exactly right. So you had a really good support network around you, and you're battling this bone condition, which I assume, and I could be wrong, you have to just be a little careful and you have to be aware and things like that. But taking all of that into account, everybody has something they have to deal with. But what was it that you did? How did you decide what it was you wanted to focus your business on, and how did you find customers?
So it's the first thing I tell anybody, what's your lowest hanging fruit? I have somebody right now who's a member, and they are full stack developer, and they want to actually start their own business. They want to start coaching people that work remotely to be more productive. I was like, great, send 20 people in your network and ask them, hey, this is what I'm doing. Get it at a price that's like a no-brainer price, not too cheap, but not too expensive, a no-brainer price, and get testimonials. So go out there instead of thinking and doing, I'm all about minimal viable product, right? Minimal viable service. Test it out. And then they get feedback right away, and then they can see what clients they work with or not. And in my case, I was working in advertising agencies before doing performance-based. So remember, this is something that back then, affiliate networks, cost per lead, cost per acquisition wasn't as popular. So I would go to websites and say, hey, you only pay me for the leads I produce. And then I would go through their whole website from the purchase all the way to the customer experience so I can understand it. So when I drive traffic to it, then I'm basically making sure that I get paid and that they convert and they have the most optimal way to go about it. So that's how I got into it. And what I wish I had was during that whole time, here was like, I am breaking barriers, I am doing everything, but I'm also a little overwhelmed, right? I have employees that have questions. And I remember one client was behind in their bills and I had no clue. So they owed me around 100 grand. And so I asked my friends and stuff, and they're like, oh, you should sue them. That actually is a wrong answer. And you would assume it's the right answer because it's a really big amount. But the thing is, by the time you actually like pay the lawyers, take up all that energy and space, you don't get that much back. You could have probably earned it back faster, right? So that was a big lesson. And here I was training for the Boston Marathon, and I'm still joining a team. And even though I've been a collegiate athlete, I've been running competitively, I still joined a team. And I was like, wait a minute, I wish I had this as an entrepreneur. So what I mean by that is I wish I had a coach, a small team of people, and then we're all sharing our stats and moving forward and cheering each other on. And I looked around and there was nothing out there. And that's why I created OwnersUp. And it's exactly what I needed to keep myself going.
I want to just jump back to your original business that you started, and we'll come back to OwnersUp in a little bit. You basically came up with a really successful way of helping people. So you found something that people needed. You're able to turn that into a successful company. And what I would like you to just tell us the story of is that once you had reached the point, you said you reached $1 million in revenue in a year. What did you do once you hit that $1 million in revenue with the company?
Kept growing it, kept hiring, kept growing it. And it was an interesting thing. So one thing I had no clue about, and this is back in 2005, 2006, around that time, is that I was actually doing something that I was making sure I was traveling to 2 countries or 3 countries at times, right around Christmas to New Year's. So what that had me do is right before I left, I had to make sure that I was super focused and got things done because I was going to places like Peru at the time that had no internet connection, Cuba, which Americans can't have internet. There was a bunch of places I was going to that there was no access to my employees. So what that forced me to do is actually trust my employees and make sure that they had everything they needed to run without me and the company could run without me. And then what I did is I basically leveraged Parkinson's law. Parkinson's law essentially is whatever you give yourself, if you give yourself 2 hours to do something, it's going to take you 2 hours to do. So if you notice right before vacation, you get so much done, it's because you have a deadline. You're like, oh shit, I got to get all this done. So I was doing this in my business not without even realizing it because I wanted to go travel. And at that time, and I was choosing countries where like internet was not happening.
That's really interesting. So by the time you'd reached the end of your first year, you had already built up a team that you could take over from you while you were away and just make sure that things keep on running. What were your biggest challenges in terms of setting that team up and getting them to the place where they're effective enough that you can walk out the door and stay out for a while?
So another thing I didn't know, remember, this is like now it's like really obvious. They're like some people, everyone's talking about virtual assistants, doing all of that. And I had 2 people in the US and a lot of my team from Colombia. So I was paying maybe people like, which was really good in Colombia, but a price where would be a joke in the US. But I made sure that I was paying them top dollar over there. So I was getting professionals and then having them run, and they knew perfect English and Spanish, and they were on the US time, which worked out perfectly. And when I was building a team, I just looked at, okay, what do I need each step of the way to remove myself? So at this point, I needed a tech person. So I had a CTO. I needed a salesperson. I needed an account manager. I needed affiliate manager. So I would start, as I was growing, start pricing it out. And then that allowed me to start thinking about strategy and investing in other companies.
I think that's a really wise thing to do. And I have to say, not everybody goes down that path of being deliberate about thinking about how you could remove yourself from your business and what you need to do. That's quite interesting. So tell us a little bit more about that journey. So that business, where is it today? And then I'll get into some of the other things that you've done.
So I eventually sold it. The company was running without me. Eventually I exited. And then right when I was exiting, because I was involved in a bunch of companies, and one of the companies was a startup called Spokesmoms. And we had 3 other partners, and I was just a CMO at that time. I was like I only want to be CEO of one company. I want to be partners in the others. And we need to raise money. So they're like, hey, Tanya, you have the most credentials. You're going to have to raise the money. I was like, what? Me? I've never raised money. I've only known how to bootstrap credit cards. Let's do this. But they're like, no, we really need to invest. And I was like, okay. So they put me as a CEO. I go raise money. I have somebody who is ready to sign the check, ready to go. I had to think twice. And it was the hardest decision I've ever done. There's a movie, What to Expect, the book, What to Expect When Expecting, or something like that. I forgot the book's name, but it was all over the movies. And we were in the trailer ahead of time because we had a celebrity on our team, Ali Landry. And I wasn't married. I didn't have kids at that time. And I had to ask myself, is this something I'm willing to sacrifice to have success? And I had to check my ego because my ego, ooh, this is really cool. This is great. But internally, I knew that I would give it all and miss that time. And so I decided to pull out of it. And then the investor didn't happen. And now we're all kind of friends, but it was a tough spot, but I needed to do it for myself. And that was really hard. And that was my first kind of scenario where I'm always thinking about that. Success is great, but people need to realize what are the costs. And if you're really willing to go all out, you got to know yourself. So there's a lot of stories about like people gaining a million and all of this, but I have to say that you really need to look at what is your ideal life, right? And sometimes it's, what would you want? Let's say you have a million and you're making 30%, and let's say you're taking home 250, but now maybe you're running like a one shop and you're making 400,000 and you take home 300,000. Like, you just got to see what is your dream moving forward and how do you want to go about it. And I think that's super important. And even when I was running in college, I had scholarships to go in many places. And the place I went to ended up, I did it for academics and ended up like Division 3, which Division 3, there's Division 1 where it's like top athletes. And I got into Division 1, but I wanted to go to Wellesley. And what ended up happening is the runners on my team were like sacrificing everything to be number one. But I was like, after this, what is there? The Olympics? I didn't want the Olympics, right? So I wanted to have a life. I also needed to support myself. So I had work study and had to babysit. And I was the captain of the team. So there's only so much to do. And since I valued being on the top, making sure I'm in the top 5, I knew the race I was playing, what my goal was. And I think that's super important, especially in the world of Instagram, in the world of just like social. Like we look at this and we don't realize the cost. And then the people that you're talking about also, it's like, what is the time that they have and how much do they want to make? And what are they willing to like, what is the cost? What is it worth to them? And when I was in my 20s, it was worth a lot to me. I was like, I was really, and I also had that lots of, when you're that young, you have a different type of energy, right? Now, if I have a glass of, I don't know, like any kind of booze, I'm done for a week.
Absolutely. I think that you're right. It's very important to be able to understand, because what you're willing to sacrifice in order to achieve the success that you think you want. Because I know a lot of people, when they achieve that success, they feel really hollow inside. And it's just, it suddenly turns out to not been what they really wanted after all, even though they thought they did. I want to just loop back just a little bit, because I want to make sure that I understood what you were saying correctly. So you got to the place where you sold your first business, and you were also participating as a partner or a co-founder with another startup. And it was that other startup that was looking for investment. And then once you got to the place where the money was there, you had to decide whether you wanted to pursue that dream with that other startup. Is that correct?
Yeah, I had to raise over $1 million and I went from CMO to CEO.
That was the big difference, is that there was a little bit of a pivot in terms of your role. And you had to decide, do I want to do this CEO?
Because when they're investing on a team, but they're really investing on the CEO, how they're going to move this forward. And so all the pressure and everything was on you, right? And especially if you're the one raising the money and you have to say, yes, I can bring this company to the next level. I knew what it took, and that would be working lots of hours, doing all of these things. And I wasn't willing at that time to sacrifice, because if you notice how I was growing my first company, I made sure I was growing it and traveling and doing things I love.
Whereas you might not have had that ability to do that with this second.
I know, I knew it was, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Can I do it? Yeah, absolutely. Is it my path? Sometimes it's better to look at those stories and just like, yeah, that's great. But it's that time I don't want to sacrifice.
I want to ask one more question about that particular scenario. And because I think that for people who are in that kind of a situation where they have to make a really hard decision, it can be really tricky because other people's dreams are relying on you, and you're holding the responsibilities for making this thing work. Can you just talk us through what was going through your head as you went through this decision-making process, and how did you handle the disappointment that obviously your fellow co-founders must have felt?
I think one of the most important exercises to do for anything in your life to make decisions that align for you is to actually figure out your values. And I used to think, I remember someone telling me this, and I was just like, figure out values. These words people pull off is like family, integrity, all this stuff. So I had a hard time doing that because I'm not much of a wordsmith, but I'm a visual person. So my tip is if you are similar to me and you're visual, like literally create a vision board. Think about how would you want your ideal life? And just put pictures everywhere and now describe it. And so in mine, there's always lots of family in there, and there's always lots of adventure and all of those. And there wasn't really like money and status and everything. And also, you want to make sure that the values, like if everyone had to put their values on paper, that you would know yours. So like mine was seize life now adventure, and I added a little bit more of my taste to it. So I know those are my values and I own it. And then the next thing that's super important that most people forget is to rank the values. And that's where you second guess yourself, right? Because you didn't rank them. And even like I did this before I met my husband, everything I ranked what is important to me. And I realized any relationship that didn't work for me, it was that gray area where I was being a little slippery when I was ranking stuff. So for example, I have dated before I got married a guy that I wanted somebody who was like always growing and personal development. But then when I was dating him, I realized my value of family is really high and his wasn't. And we were like his career was more important than anything else. So in that case, when I was looking at adventure and stuff and family and stuff, that means my career would be over all of those things.
That
I'm
makes a lot of
all
sense.
about value-based decisions.
Absolutely. And by clarifying your values, and you knew what you made it possible for you to be really clear about what was important to you, how did you go about the process of telling these other people? Because you said you're still friends. How did you manage that transition?
I just said, I really want to have a family, be married, and I still want to travel and do things. And I know myself of if I invest and do something like this, I would be working many hours and sacrifice things that I actually love. And at the end, and this is more about an ego scenario, like that I can do this. And I realized that I really don't want that. And any way I can support you guys, move you guys forward, I'm here for you, but I don't want to play that role right now. And they took it, and it made sense because all of them were already married and had kids. I was the only one who was single.
That makes sense. Just out of sheer curiosity, what
Yeah,
did they do? Did they go and find another CEO? Did they manage to go ahead and move that forward?
hard because it was it was a hard one. So they pivoted a little, and then I think they ended up selling the technology because an idea, and then they all moved their own ways. And it's a hard one. And it was a hard one for me. Sometimes I'm like, oh, what if? But no, I know my true value. And I think that's what happens when you're really aligned to your values. It's so easy. You won't be like, what if or what's going on.
I think that,
Actually, you still kind of question it, but then you realize what is really important to you. Then you're like, yeah, I know, I value this.
yeah, I think that's what makes it. It's not any easier making the hard decisions, but it does mean that you can be a lot more confident that you've made the right decision. So let's fast forward then, because you've done your own startup, you've sold that, you've had another startup that you participated in, and you decided to step away from that one. And eventually we work our way through to your current business. Do you want to just talk a little bit more about that and how you help people with it?
So essentially, OwnersUp helps B2B service-based entrepreneurs grow their business through accountability sprints. So, three things entrepreneurs like that, no matter what stage you are, you're going to go through the overwhelm, the perfectionist stage, and the inner critic stage. You don't get past it. Or, I'm sorry, there's another fourth stage where you feel like you have to do everything and you're the only one. And those are just typical stages. And it's funny, I've seen that the people who are like the most overachievers have the hardest time in those four stages, right? And sometimes they just need an encouragement or a deadline. So we believe in positive consequences. So what I mean by that is when you have a positive consequence, if you don't get this done, you'll have to sing in front of a group, or you might have to do 50 burpees and record it, or you actually might have to present it in front of social and say, hey, I didn't get this done as I promised. But there's no social shaming. So there's a difference between social shaming and consequences. What we're doing is we're literally having your inner critic in your head is on like full blast, being like, oh, it's not enough. It's not enough. You're like, do I want to sing a song in front of the group? Or do I want to get this done? You know what? 80% is great. I'm going to submit it. It's done. And so then they start seeing the momentum, and then it starts moving forward, and then the company starts moving. And I realized that in a sense of like just everything in my life, I always had in life, there's always consequences, right? And there's always rewards. And in science, it says that as humans, we actually are motivated more by consequences. And then it just so happens when some momentum goes, of course we like rewards, but it's that movement. And I was like, huh. And then I realized that entrepreneurs were not doing the one big thing that's huge. And it's really reflecting in self-awareness. And it's a habit that you end up doing in corporate because it's structured, it's always there. You have to have like reviews, you have to like someone's reviewing your work, you have to analyze how you're doing, how can you present more. But then all of a sudden, you're an entrepreneur, you have all this freedom, and yeah, you can't even remember at the end of the day. You're just like, what the heck did I get done? And that's what happens. So, what we do is we help entrepreneurs come with that habit through a group of people. So, it's usually a group of 5. And one of our things is called a wrap. And so, R means review, and review is super important. At the end of the day, you're either going to get self-aware that the things that you're doing are basically being reactive to your clients, your employees, to your team, and you're not working on your business in the sense of moving it forward because your focus and your time just got hijacked. So you're going to be like, either you're going to be like, yes, I had a great day, or, oh, I can't believe I didn't get anything done. And that self-awareness is going to help you change. And then there's A for assess, and then you actually rate your day. And that allows you to realize, when was it a 5? Is it when I like just closed a big client? Is it when I was feeling that I actually got work done that actually moves my business forward? And so now you start creating days and make it a 5. And then P is for prioritize. Now you're actually at the time to be like, yeah, I don't want my day to be like that. So I'm really good to be like, these are the 3 things I want to prioritize. And so when you get that habit, not only are you self-aware, but you start changing, right? Changing the way you think about your business. But let's face it, as entrepreneurs, we just don't do it. It's not enough time, but you will do it in a group.
I'm listening to you outline that whole concept of consequences, and
You're still there.
I can just imagine myself having to. I'd be okay with singing a song, but if I had to record myself doing something else, I could think of a dozen things that I would just not want to do. That would be an incentive. I have come across one other one that I have used for myself in the past. Whereas is it if I forget and do something that I'm trying to change a habit, then I have to make a donation to a not-for-profit of somebody else's choice. That's a conflicted sort of a thing because happy to make the contribution, but it also the money in the wallet's kind of nice.
Hard one. We have used that one. And when entrepreneurs are really wrestling with their perfectionism, they're like, they justify and they're saying, oh, at least I'm giving it to, I don't know, breast cancer, whatever the charity is. So you start justifying things until the money is like really big. But the thing is, if you lose too much money, I don't like using money, Because once you lose too much money, then your self-esteem starts going a little, and you start telling yourself you can't. But if it's fun, like none of it's like, oh, sing a song, like you're a terrible person. It's more like, all right. And then we all like dance with you and you have that moment. So it's still cheering you forward, but you have a moment you won't forget.
I like it as an idea. I think it's really interesting because I totally get the fact that people who are overachievers tend to struggle with perfectionism, with all of those things that you mentioned. And it can be very difficult to get past. And the stages that you've mentioned in terms of an entrepreneur has to move through these stages. And I'll have to be honest, you never get rid of all of those stages. You always experience them to a slightly different degree, depending on where you are in your business. But the mindset side of being an entrepreneur is probably, and nobody really talks about it all that much, 80% of your success at least is related to your mindset. And I've seen it over and over again, coming back to the online business lift-off program that we ran for carers and people over 50. The people who thought, I can't do this, I can't learn, I can't make the time, I'm scared to do this, what if I succeed, was the biggest secret fear that people had. And they don't see themselves as an entrepreneur, they still see themselves as somebody who needs a job. And that's fascinating to me because it makes such a difference. Do you find with the people that you work with, there comes a time when mindset battle becomes just a little bit easier to get over?
I believe in a group supporting, and sometimes when you see somebody like the 4-minute mile, right? No one thought the 4-minute mile was possible. One person broke it, then all of a sudden it's achievable. So when you have a group of people and then you've seen this person wrestle with something and then they finally get through and then you see someone else do it, you're just like, oh, I can do this. They did it. I'm motivated. And I have a 1.5-year-old and a 3.5-year-old. And as I told you, I've been athletic all this time and I had a C-section. And the why wasn't even strong enough. And I knew I'm one of those people who need to work out to release stress. My why is I want to be strong. I want to make sure I carry kids. And it wasn't that I was overweight. I just wasn't strong. And to get myself motivated to work out, because I've never been in that level, was hard. And so my husband would be going to the gym and he's, hey, Tanya, let's go. So I would go slowly to the gym. Then I would do some easy workout. I was like, oh, that person can do it. I can do it. When I started working out, and now I'm back into the flow of things. But it wasn't like the mindset was sometimes you just have to do baby steps and believe in it. But everybody, by the way, wrestles with mindset. And it's the mindset. If you say you're going to win, you're going to win. If you say you're going to lose, you shouldn't even do the race. Everyone goes with that. And I think that constantly reminding yourself of things you're doing and really investing in personal development is great. And having people cheering you on that actually believe in you.
Makes a huge difference. It really does. Having that group of supporters, it's really powerful. Well, Tanya, we've hit the end of our time, which it always happens to me. I'm always surprised. We run out of time so quick. It's been really interesting speaking with you. If people were interested in finding out more about you yourself or more about your business, where would they go?
They could go into LinkedIn. What is my LinkedIn? It's Tanya, I think it's Tanya OU. Let me just make sure that, yeah, it's actually Tanya OwnersUp. You can find me, I think, when you search on that. And then if anybody wants the wrap of like how to go about it, so you get yourself in there, and I encourage anybody who does do it, have another friend to do this with and send it. I will send you the link for that.
Okay, that'd be fantastic. And I'll put those in the show notes. And do you want to just share the URL for your website?
Sure. It's OwnersUp, OwnersUp.com.
Fantastic. So thank you so much, Tanya. It's been great speaking with you. And I know that listeners are going to find this really interesting.
Excellent. Thank you for having me.